Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to our guest. Before I do that, here's a quote just for this episode. Begin at once to live and count each separate day as a separate life. Seneca. Our guest today makes me think of that quote. He's a recurring guest, Nathan Merrill. We're talking about, I guess this is called thread talk, unless we just take that away. I challenge you to follow him on Threads. I believe it's Tile Obsession, if I'm correct, and myself on Threads. Nathan is by trade a contractor, but more so an artisan. If you're one of the 8, 9, 10 clients he takes on in a year, you're going to be the type of person that likes detail and a masterwork as opposed to commodity and generality. Nathan is a thoughtful guy and he comes on the show and we talk all topics. So buckle your seat and you might want to listen to this episode a couple times.
All right. I'm happy to be back. We're getting into not a rut, a rhythm. We're getting into a rhythm. I don't want to say we're finding our stride. We're finding something though.
Yeah, I'd like to. I feel a little like I've let everyone down on Threads this week. I've barely posted my thoughts. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you find that it comes in waves, or are you sharing, or are you just inspired every day? What's been your experience?
I would say there's two layers to that. Well, probably more than two, but the two that it's funny you should ask that because this week in particular, um, it's like I could sit down anytime and grab a pen and paper and just start writing things. But then there's this second layer, like filter to it. And that will allow me to either press post or not press post. Sometimes I'll just write, click, post, done. Don't even think about it. Other times I'll write something and then you just second guess it. This week, it's been similar for me. I've slowed down a little bit. I still write a bit in journals every day and I write on my phone, Google Notes, documents, that sort of stuff. But it's pretty much always on tap, I would say. But then this other thing, I don't know if it's a conscientious thing or what it is. There are a lot of times where I just delete, I just backspace the whole thing, or I'll just copy it into a notepad and shelve it, come back to that thought later. Um, I think kind of like you, we both just have this stream of thoughts that just comes to us and we just sit and we write this stuff. For better or for worse, I just put it out there because I feel like that's the most genuine way to go about getting these type of thoughts out there is just to do it. And you don't really think about the downstream effect of it. It's not like we're out here posting radical things either. These are just philosophical thoughts. These are ontological thoughts. Simple stuff, really, nothing groundbreaking. But there's definitely a psychological element there as to that. But yes, cycles for sure. Um, how about you? How is it similar? Cycles?
I found that I wouldn't post things because I was insecure about grammar.
Mm,
Like there's 3,000 or so thoughts in my Evernote
hmm
that I didn't post because I didn't know how to structure what I was saying
hmm
outside of blabbering, or like was worried. Jenna's taught me grammar over time. Jenna's my fiance. She learned that in school.
hmm
Uh, I would have had to. Part of me says I would have had to stay in school to learn it, but at the same time, if I really wanted to learn it, I know it. So I have a lot of frustration around that. But I've learned to. I'm better at understanding how to structure my sentences in that
hmm
way now, or at least if I'm not, I feel or I believe I am, and that's led to this could be confident idiocy. So
That's
that
a
was
relatable.
not putting it out because
hmm
I wasn't sure if I was writing it correctly.
Right. I
And
don't.
there's a lot of thoughts that haven't seen the light of day because I wasn't sure how to
mm,
how to write it.
Yeah. Well, that's the I can relate with that entirely. What I put on threads is just like a sentence here or there. I have literally notebooks full, like pages after page after just thought, So it sometimes makes you feel a little bit delusional, like, man, where does all this thought come from? And why do I have just this? Why can I sit down and have a stream of just like, 1,000 words in a row? It's nothing. You just write. Grammar hasn't the insecurity thing. Yes, but for me, it wasn't grammar. It's just the nature of the thoughts. It's like, who can really follow along, number one, with language this dense? I don't know why when I write, it's very dense language, which requires a lot of unpacking. And there's people that do write in that way. I mean, you know this. We both are prolific readers. I mean, there's a lot of writers. You pick up what they're saying, and you're like, this is so incredibly dense. I enjoy that type of language. You have to really engage with it and be able to follow along with it. But
Didn't
that's where my
Schopenhauer speak to
insecurities.
it though?
Say it again.
Schopenhauer had a lot to say about the people that write for audiences.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Schopenhauer. You quote a lot of Schopenhauer and you quote a lot of Kierkegaard, and I
Yeah.
appreciate both of those authors. Schopenhauer was a different mind. I appreciate a lot of the thoughts that he said. Can you remind me of the specific thoughts from him concerning that?
Yeah, the it was uh, well, the theme of that thought, I don't remember the direct quote, but it's the simple mind will write for the crowd,
Hmm.
or the I think it's the beginning of the world as will an idea. Hold on, let me get it. I know where it is on my bookshelf.
Jay's running into his library, which is just right behind him.
Here it is. Here it is. So yeah,
Got
I
it.
do know where the book is. And one of my regrets in my life so far is that I'm only on page 36, 37 of The World and Will,
Oh wow.
World as Will and Idea, 3 volumes and one unabridged for all the video listeners. But on uh, the first introduction here, I believe he talks about it. It's one of the best introductions that I ever read in a book, actually. It was very interesting. Um, this might not be the best for our podcast, but then again, who cares?
Yeah.
Was it
We
preface? I don't let me let well, it'd be helpful if I knew where this part was. Damn. Is it here?
I agree with the notion, whatever the specific of the quote was, I agree with the notion. But that's the nature of overcoming our own internal, I think it's one of those things everyone talks real tongue in cheek about personal growth,
I found it.
and okay, perfect.
Well, here's the it starts out. I propose to point out here how this book must be read in order to be thoroughly understood. By means of it, I only intend to impact a single thought. Yet, notwithstanding all my endeavors, I find no shorter way of imparting it than this whole book. God, that's I hold this thought to be that which has very long been sought for under the name of philosophy, and the discovery of which is therefore regarded by those who are familiar with history as quite as impossible as the discovery of the philosopher's stone, although it is already said by Pliny, he's speaking some like Latin or something that, and then it goes on to say, see, it's funny, I thought I found it now. I did. It was something like if you're not willing to read this, and this, just put this book on your table and make it a coffee table. Like if you haven't read Kant, if you haven't read the Upanishads, if
Hmm.
you're ultimately not ready. And then that's what came to my mind when you asked about that quote or that thought was the writer that writes for the crowd writes for fools, or the deep the more depth, the more work that it takes. This is not something I've just heard it through Schopenhauer. I was just actually reading it this morning through Thoreau with Walden, Henry David Thoreau.
Mm-hmm.
That the classics, for example, it takes a lot of work. It takes time. You're wrestling with it. Alexander the Great traveled. He was saying, well, Thoreau was saying he traveled with Homer's Iliad, which I coincidentally just have in the
Mm-hmm.
guest room. It's just like, and I haven't read it yet, which is bothersome.
Mm-hmm.
Bothersome, embarrassed actually, shame.
Yeah.
The Iliad is in our guest room, one of our guest rooms, and it just sits there at the hope that one of the guests picks it up when I have not picked it up. Sheer hypocrisy, Nathan. Now I'm starting
It's
to wake
very,
up. It's helpful today.
yeah.
So to answer your question, I'm frustrated, man, and I'm frustrated myself. You didn't ask if I'm frustrated or not, but I am, because I'm a huge worshiper of worshiper Schopenhauer and Kierkegaard, two diametrically opposed philosophies and just
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
Although they have a lot of similarities in that, ironically, and have not read enough of. I've read more than maybe. I don't like to compare myself to them. I've read, but I haven't read their corpus, right?
Right.
Which bothers me.
Yeah. I have
Like,
so
it's
many
gonna take
authors like that.
years, though.
Right.
Like
Right.
like like Edna and Michael Hong, they're a husband and wife. They translated Kierkegaard for years. They have this 20 plus book volume, all his works
Mm-hmm.
translated. It's like, that's my dream. So let me just do all these other things. Let me build this company. Let me build these businesses. Let me do all these things. And then someday on my deathbed, I'll get to start.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. What are you supposed to do? You know what I mean? Because I don't think there's a I like the idea of just take action, right? Take action, just do it, just put it out there. But also everyone has the internal voice is set at a different volume for everyone. It just happens that my internal voice, um, I would say 95% of the things that I write, my internal voice tells me, no, just leave it right there in the notepad. And maybe someday you'll revisit that. I'm not sure. I compiled some stuff the other day, and it's like I got enough stuff handwritten and in Evernote. Like you said, you had 3,000 notes. Same thing. My Evernote is. I'm actually frustrated with Evernote. Did you see the update? I didn't have the paid plan for it, and now they limit you to like 50 notes or something. I don't know. So I switched to Google Notes recently. But same thing. I think I have 2,200 notes or something in there. And between that and handwritten journals, I probably have enough for 3 or 4 volumes of who knows what. Here's what I was thinking. Maybe someday I'll digitize all of it and run it through Chat GPT and see what they have to say about it.
And you have a book.
Yeah, sure. But it's so eclectic. It's so sporadic. There's no I don't know what the
Listen to
things I
this.
like to
This is
write
the
are.
part. Um, Listen to this. You're gonna laugh at this part here. As I have absolutely nothing to advance to get. Oh no. Germany alone. Oh no, here. Yeah. Uh, but I fear I shall not escape even thus. The reader. Oh no, he said, who can stand all this? Therefore, my advice is to simply lay down the book. This is in the preface. This is in the preface.
Uh,
No, because before that he said, and then how disagreeably disappointed will many a one be if he finds no mention here of what he believes it is precisely here he ought to look for, because his method of speculation agrees with that of a great living philosopher who has certainly written pathetic books and who
uh,
only has the trifling weakness that he takes all he learned and approved before his 15th year for
wow.
inborn ideas of the human mind. Who could stand all this? Therefore, my advice is to simply lay down this book. But I fear I shall not escape even thus. The reader who has got as far as the preface has been stopped by it, has bought the book for cash and asks how he is to be indemnified. My last refuge is now to remind him that he knows how to make use of a book in several ways without exactly reading it. It may fill a gap in his library as well as many another, where neatly bound it will certainly look. Or he can lay it on the toilet table or the tea table. This is Schopenhauer's preface.
Yeah, right.
Or the tea table of some learned lady friend.
Yeah.
Or finally, what certainly is best of all, and specifically advise it, he can review it. And now that I have allowed myself the jest to which in this two-sided life hardly any page can be too serious to grant a place, I part with the book with deep seriousness, in the sure hope that sooner or later it will reach those to whom alone it can be addressed. And for the rest, patiently resign that the same fate should, in full measure, befall it that in all ages has, to some extent, befallen all knowledge, and especially the weightiest knowledge of the truth, to which only a brief triumph is allotted between the two long periods in which is condemned as paradoxical or disparaged as trivial. The former fate is also wont to befall its author. But life is short, and truth works far and lives long. Let us speak the truth.
Wow. So essentially, every philosophical mind is a tormented mind.
And then
I've come to,
Neitzsche picked this book up when he was in his late 20s.
right,
And it
right.
changed his life. And he went on to impact Western society
Mm-hmm.
in ways that we're still grappling with, frankly.
Right.
Because for my limited, I would even say limited study, and it's been years now with my limited study. Nietzsche influenced Foucault and Derrida and all the postmoderns, even like the Marx and Gramsci, I think too, and all these thinkers that now we're grappling with in Western society.
Mm-hmm. It was Nietzsche. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and
I just read a
Schopenhauer.
quote just the other day. I read a quote. I can't remember who the author was, but it was something about Nietzsche, and he said Nietzsche was the author that did it for me. And I can't remember exactly what the guy was saying, but
That's
he was saying
Joseph
that
Campbell.
that was, yeah, you saw the quote too.
I
Yeah.
posted it. Yeah,
Okay.
Joseph
Okay.
Campbell was the mentor for those that are listening that like Star Wars. Star
Hmm.
Wars exists because of Joseph Campbell. He mentored the director, producer, what have you. What's his name? I don't
George
remember.
Lucas.
George Lucas. Star Wars is the hero's is a yeah.
Hmm.
He was his mentor was Joseph Campbell. He was a mythologist.
Have you seen Dune or read the books
I
Dune?
haven't read the books. I
Okay.
started the first book, but I didn't.
Okay. Okay.
And I was listening. I wasn't reading. I'd like to read the books.
Yeah, it's very Star Wars-esque, and it's the hero's journey. It's very biblical. The narrative is very biblical feeling. It's profound. I've not read the books. I just watched the movie recently, but I've watched it 3 times now because it's fascinating. Um, it's set like out in the future, the year like 10,000 or something like that. But I had heard a different, it was either podcaster or author recently say that one of the rules or the laws in the future is that you do not make a general intelligence. And this is the year 10,000. And that was one of the golden rules that they had at the time was you don't do that, um, which is very interesting. The movie itself is very interesting. It's this idea of a technological yet brutal society, and I like the aspect of the brutal nature of resource gathering. There's something brutalistic about that we still see in the world today, and so you don't escape it. You move into the future, and this brutalist aspect of reality cannot be avoided. You probably recently, there was the podcasters, the big podcasters, they all kind of make their rounds, and so certain topics will kind of rise to the top of the topics that people are talking about. One of them recently was the resources for things like smartphones. Where does the uranium come from, and the cobalt and all of that? It's strange to me how technological societies alleviate the burdens of nature, we'll call, on large swaths of the populace, but there's a certain front edge of resource gathering that is so brutal that how here we are in the year 2023, and there are places in the world where every bit of the things that Karl Marx was writing about are still prevalent in existence. Every bit of the things that Neitzsche wrestled with internally, these are still external realities that exist in the world. And so I was reminded of that watching that movie Dune, which, you just reminded me of. Speaking of Star Wars, it's a fascinating movie, and also a fascinating, I think, commentary on the nature of existence too. Something about that boundedness and that brutal front edge of reality. And that same spirit you find in almost all of the philosophers. They all have this. It's strange how they all have this realist edge to them. It's the Nietzschean thing. I think Nietzsche was really the culmination of all the philosophers' thought. It brought all of humanity to his thought, which was God is dead. And I understand that's just the cliche of his thought. There's so much more to what he was saying, but what a brutalist and stark edge to reality that's there. And for me, it's Nietzsche too. Nietzsche's the guy that just brings you to the gallows, and once you go through it, it's like, all right, I've seen what that man saw, and now what? And that's the point where humanity is. It's a fascinating period that we live in because of the artificial intelligence thing that's going on.
I thought about him a lot and his story a lot, and it, and psychology. In the absence of love, resentment takes over.
Mm-hmm.
It just becomes a mind conversation and a
Right.
rationale. Rationale is not enough. Rationale is a liar because it
Mm-hmm.
deceives itself. So the whole thing becomes a fiction. Even if it's descriptive.
Mm-hmm.
Who's to say everything isn't a placebo
Right.
or everything isn't a self-fulfilling prophecy? Like, the reason I bring that up is because Nietzsche so clearly is pursuing love and significance in his curiosities. Like, and I say this in this fact, if you go to Wikipedia and you see who he followed, he's like over 50 influences.
Mm.
Many intellectuals, gifted geniuses, they have like 4. I just find that very interesting. If still looking at his life, he lost his father, who was a theologian,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this. So I think about the impact that love has on human beings. It almost create. I think love creates a precondition of believing stories that have utility or positive consequences for the subject. And in the absence of love as a precondition, they're without culture in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
and they've got to form a culture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some of us are thrown in this world without love
Mm-hmm.
as a precondition. And I mean, like around us, like that invisible hug.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us are thrown in with the hug. And when those that have been hugged stop hugging the unhuggable,
Mm-hmm.
no one gets hugs eventually.
Yeah.
And then now the unhugged genius can come up with a very clear, crisp, arguable sense of reality that all may be true, and then to what end?
Mm-hmm.
They can see the truth so glaringly obvious because they were never hugged
Mm-hmm.
and be right, but then to what end?
Yeah.
Like to what end? Right. Well, and they're, to destruction.
Mm.
And I just think about this in business because the bit and as a petri dish of like
Mm-hmm.
seeing these things play out, because the god, the business owner is the godlike creature that they make up. They create the rules, they create it all, they create the rules, they create those preconditions in their behavior and in the concepts, frameworks by which they live in, by which they speak through. And the ones that aren't loving and lovable, they go, they don't, their organizations don't last long.
Mm.
They break down. They get feasted on by their people. God is dead and we have killed him. There's not enough water to wash away the blood.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Neitzsche, right? And beyond good and evil. So,
Mm-hmm.
man, I just think it's love, getting love and giving love is an irrational. It's irrational, but it has a rationale to it over generations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know why I said all that. I mean, I think I know
Well,
why. Because Nietzsche, right? Like he, I think he never loved, like he never was never he didn't get love, and he died in an insane asylum.
right,
That scared Jung so deeply
right,
that he made sure he did certain things for himself. I think
right,
it scares Peterson because Peterson's really a Nietzschean.
right. Well, I don't. So I think that there's an element of fear there because it was not the intention of Nietzsche to die insane. It's just the way that it went, um, which is fascinating because it was in service to the God that is knowledge, and that's what there's this difference between the rational and the irrational, and at the limits of rational is where you run into the irrational, which seems to be love is some sort of thing that's not quite irrational, it's not quite rational, it's this intermediate state. And I think that it's just ironic that I read a lot of love in Nietzsche. When I read Nietzsche, I feel all sorts of love in his language, but it's this love of a person, you're right, without something connected with it. So he's a driven individual, but he's driven in this technical sense, and he's got knowledge that's taking him
Is it a
to.
precondition for the cultural critic to be disconnected from culture? So he's not connected to, like, if he's an individual, he's not connected to siblings, parents, children, friends, enemies,
Mhm.
and in the economy of interpersonal integration through the hero's journey through the economy. Like, he's not pursuing labor. He's not in the. He's disconnected from the culture. He's and he's entitled. So, that gives the cultural critic the ground, the soil to birth the ability to critique on that level, and then essentially they become a martyr,
Mhm.
right? Separate from culture, they have all their energies to aim at culture, and they become they become a martyr, you know.
Well, and a counterculture forms around them, un un unintentionally. A counterculture forms around them. So it's an individual that, it's almost like the individual that sees through the illusion of abstract systems, but they inevitably become the new sun at the center of the arising abstract system that follows in their wake.
So that's
Um,
like an inescapable
yeah,
reality.
it's the nature of truth. That's what I'm saying. This brutalist front edge of truth. There's this inescapable structure to it, and the structure implies struggle. That that's why I said the love thing in Nietzsche's writings. I perceive love not through the abundance of personal love that he experienced, but through the absence of it. You discover the yearning for it, which is this. It's a transcendent evidence that whatever it is that we are doing, it is somehow after love, and that it's an ontological thing. It's like these things are wrapped up. So much of this stuff is wrapped up. It's definitionally wrapped up. It's contextually wrapped up. And the absence of something is not like evidence of it not existing. Usually, the way in which something is absent to me is the more of its absence is more evidence of its existence. And Nietzsche's the example of that, and especially the symbolism of his life. It's like the symbolism of his life was, in one word, you could almost say destruction. And that's what he was. He was a destructive cultural force. And in his wake, a counterculture, which is not even a counterculture now. I would say that the spirit of Nietzsche, unbeknownst to society, has disrupted our mythology. And that's what the meaning crisis is. So many people now talking about the meaning crisis. It's that right there. Our mythology has been disrupted. We have we have schismatic cultures formed, and you see the same paradigm played out in business too. It's not like all business is one or another type culture. You have a variety of cultures with different philosophies at their core. But you're right, so many of them become cannibalistic and internally destructive, um, without an explicit focus on love. Um, is that I'm
Yeah.
once again, I want to make sure that I'm understanding.
Oh, just fleeting thoughts here, right?
Right, right.
I'd like to know what are some references for what are some books that you'd recommend and or
Books that I would.
authors, or what are you reading now, or what have you
So
read that's really, you know,
recent. So over the past year, I'm reading very little, and it's mainly because I actually became a little too overwhelmed with too much stuff going on in my head, and I was too much of a consumer of all of this stuff, and I needed to start doing my own thing with my thoughts, which was writing. So over the past year, basically, I've hardly read anything, mostly just poetry. I've read a lot of Shakespeare and Longfellow and Robert Frost and Walt Whitman, just the real cliche, the authors, the poets you would expect. I've been reading a lot of them. Um, Before that, though, it was philosophy. Philosophy. It started, a lot of my reading trajectory started early on with the simple entrepreneurial, like help books, like Stephen Covey, like Seven Habits of the Highly Effective, or The Power of Habit, The One Thing, books like that. This is 6 and 7 and 8 years ago. So I started reading a lot of entrepreneurial business type books, which led into a lot of the philosophy books.
hmm.
Um, in philosophy, though, I mean, I would make I mean, the basics. You can't. That's all I really know. I've not, like Foucault. I read a little bit of Foucault, but there's a lot of these offshoot philosophers that are a little lesser known. I've really only gone through a lot of the well-known ones: Schopenhauer, Neitzsche. Um, I really am fascinated with Hegel. Hegel is he he's another one of those minds that's so dense, it's so complicated. You have to read a lot of what other people say about him from multiple different angles just to kind of understand what he was getting at. And then following down from there, Heidegger is one that I think I could read Heidegger probably 100 times and just grapple with the things that he was putting out there. The whole idea of the any of the authors that write on phenomenology, um, phenomenology was the thing that really studying the nature of existence and what is the experience of living like what is it like, what is the phenomena of existence like, was when I realized like I needed to stop reading so much and just focus on writing and the experience of living, because I had gone too far into my head with all of this stuff. But more specifics, I like Karl Popper a lot. We've talked about, me and you have talked about
Yeah.
Popper a lot. I like Karl Popper. I like I like Wittgenstein because I feel like he was actually a, a precursor, a pre-runner to the modern, um, where the state of computer science is and artificial intelligence and cognitive science and all that. I think that Wittgenstein was kind of before that, because a lot of the stuff you read in Wittgenstein is like it is the mathematizing, or it is trying to make natural language computational almost, or trying to connect computational language with the language, common language, the way that we talk to each other. And which is a fascinating project because that's really what's going on today. That's the front edge of philosophy now, is the continuance of the thought of Wittgenstein and then the people that followed in his steps, Turing and those guys. Um, and maybe that's just my current obsession, is that because that's what I perceive as the front edge of philosophy now. But so there's a few authors there. Um,
This is the
so
quote.
yeah.
Um, I did find it. The person who writes for fools is always sure of a large audience. But I'd like to
Uh,
clarify what I believe he meant by fools. Um, there's something very humbling about reading these types of books, because the first go around, if we're going to be hyper focused on just a book, for example, like, and the world as well an idea, even in the preface, Schopenhauer alludes to it. If I'm looking to read through this, skim through it, that I'm that's a foolish act.
hmm.
It likely won't be till iterations through the experience that I'm less of a fool than I was before it. I think the fool is less about uh, 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 um, name calling or labeling someone that, that's lesser than another, than one that may have potential, that's lazy, that's not engaged, that they're it's a character attack more than a biology attack. Like he's not putting. I don't think that it. I mean, that's one way of interpreting it. Like the fool is the one that isn't putting in the work.
Hmm.
Like we're all fools. It's
Yeah, but there's statistical implication there too, because it's like not everyone has the mind of Schopenhauer. You know what I mean? Not everyone has capacity in that regard. Um,
well, arguably, no reader has the mind of Schopenhauer, or they would have written the book. I still
that's
follow the
true.
train of thought,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
I'm saying I don't know how that. There are plenty of fools that I think has a double meaning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like you have to, you work at it. We have to work on these things. We have to work. You have to wrestle with Hegel. You have to wrestle with his sources. I always kind of lean towards, I don't like. I think I know why. I mean, I'm like this, but regardless of why I'm like this, I'd still be an avatar for this thought that whether it be true or not, if certain people, let's say, have a 0.0001% chance to grapple with certain ideas, I don't like being the proselytizer of that idea. I'd rather say,
Right.
hey, where are you at? What are you capable of? Here, try this, try that. I think
Hmm.
that's the teacher in me.
Hmm. Hmm.
The maybe overly compassionate to the point of delusion. So I'm not. Of course, I'm interpreting this the way that I'm interpreting it.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I'm looking at that side. Yes, it
Let's
could also be argued that some people, maybe their computer can't put certain information through it. Maybe it'll
mhm.
spit back. I don't know.
So in light of what he said, why do you think he wrote still? Because that's really what we're getting at here is we're getting at this idea of like
Well,
it's almost say
yeah.
it again.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, we're getting at this idea of this, the creator and the consumer thing. And the reason I stopped about a year ago consuming so voraciously philosophical idea was because of what you said. So many of these people are geniuses beyond comprehension. And it is disheartening to just read and read and read this stuff and never feel like you're the type of person who will have that type of intellectual contribution to make. And so it was like you're trying to climb an Everest that is not actually an Everest. It's just it's an infinite Everest. That's what the collection of knowledge is, where there is no conclusion to that endeavor. I'm not saying that endeavor is foolish. That endeavor is part of wisdom, but also part of it, I would say, would be the understanding of when it's time for you to just let the water settle so that you can understand for yourself the ways in which I contribute to existence. I'm here. I don't necessarily have to have an ideology about why. I don't have to know that there is or is not a reason for that. But what I would like to know internally is only for myself is can I contribute? And it's like how can you play music at a rock concert? I mean, there's only one guy playing music at the rock concert, and that's the guy up on stage. And so if your desire is to play music, you have to leave the rock concert and go somewhere else to play your own music. And that's this thing I was saying earlier about culture and counterculture. Nietzsche wanted to play music, and he had to go to his own place to do it. And
Hmm.
it just turns out that things happen along the way. There's so many variables at play. Biology was at play. I don't I don't like when people use the ultimate outcome of Nietzsche as proof that you shouldn't go to those places in your thought because we don't know why Nietzsche, we just don't know. And the reason I say that is my mother, for instance, she was schizophrenic bipolar. A lot of variables at play there that kind of led to all of that. I can't look at her as a baby and say, this is what this child will be. There's just no way of knowing. Would I have liked that we live in a world where Nietzsche didn't pass away in the way in which he did? Sure, but it kind of ruins the symbolism of it. It kind of ruins the romance of it, and it ruins the story of it now, looking back. But that's kind of where I got with a lot of reading and reading, and here we are now talking about it, which is wonderful. I'm happy that this is taking place.
You mentioned earlier that you started with the Coveys and that led you to philosophy. I found a lot of entrepreneurs. They are philosophically inclined. There's even I have not read it yet, but there's a book about the philosophers and business people. I don't recall the author, and even Ayn Rand has some things about that philosophy, business.
Hmm.
And I think that the businesses that founders create are an embodiment of their philosophy, if anything.
Hmm.
So there's something deeply philosophical about business.
So would would you say that a founder, if that's true, to what extent is the success of a company dependent on the founder's own concretization of their philosophies?
See, now we've opened the gates of what really I do.
That's what you do.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You help individuals concretize their own
Yes.
internal North Stars, if you will, their own internal ideologies or philosophies,
And
and
over
build
time,
upon them.
start to create a moat around them so
Interesting.
that they don't get acquired reactively, so that their interpersonal lives don't fall into oblivion as likely, so that the ultimately there's more profit. Yeah, that is it. It's hard to pinpoint it because it's a bit abstract.
Hmm.
Um,
No,
and I
it actually it clicks now, and I very much understand it now. It's funny because you've probably noticed I've prodded with you on multiple occasions to kind of understand what it is that you do. And now with that last thought, it very much does click. I very much do understand because we both see this a lot. The world is full of a lot of naive people, which is fine. I don't want to be naive in my opinions about the naivete of the world, but that includes business owners, that includes founders and entrepreneurs, and even it's funny how strange the world is because people find themselves in places and positions where you would think the natural filters and processes of how culture and structure is organized would alleviate us of many of those annoyances, but it doesn't, which is strange because that means that each of us is vulnerable, from the White House to the orphanage or wherever. We're each vulnerable in our existence relative. No, that's not right. Hmm. We're all vulnerable, and I would say one of the safeguards against the vulnerability of existence is the concretization of your internal. What is it? It's not philosophy, it's not ideology, it's story. I mean,
well, that's part of it. I think language, story, the mediums one inhabits and one doesn't.
mhm,
Even on a very granular level, how one listens and how one speaks truth
yeah.
has a is a philosophical journey that has an impact on the business, on the person,
Hmm.
on the choices the choices that they want to make. If I
It's
don't
all
want to
evidence.
if I don't even want to make a choice anymore, there's less that I have to choose. It's already been chosen for me
Hmm.
because I don't want to make it anymore because something else over here changed. So now I'm not even making a choice over here. I'm not even aroused to make a choice.
Hmm.
The people are paradoxical, right?
Hmm.
Psychologically. So I but it's like the person, the creator of a culture, the business owner, the business founder, they can do something. They could do something about it because they have resources. They have
Hmm.
more power. So, and there's so in my own pursuit of power, it seemed like a fairly logical thing to go about doing,
Hmm.
serving those with it, right?
Hmm.
So, yeah, it's like a petri dish for studying the human condition, and these bigger ideas are starting to be, just it's like how do we pursue meaning in our own lives and the search for truth and our identity, and these big ideas while still being a part of this system where if we don't
Hmm.
put our labor to use, we don't get the luxury, the entitlement of pursuing these big ideas because we can't survive. You may do it through tile, and I do it through this.
Hmm.
And here we are.
Yeah, and the contribution is the evidence of the spirit that we embody because we are contributing I was thinking about this the other day. Um, I feel like culture in America in 2023, or maybe in the West, we've lost our collective um, optimism about being a part of what we have built. It's easy to be cynical. It's easy to be cynical and a critic, and the calls for just burning it down, to me, they're frightening to me. They're extremely frightening because it's like we can always look at utopian what ifs. We can always look at how culture could be better. But if you obsess with that and become too much of a critic of that, you run the risk of losing track of your own place, your own safe place within the structure that we have all collectively built. And it's all in the name of a boogeyman, a utopian boogeyman that we don't even know that we have the capacity to to manifest in the world. I like the idea of, well, I don't know. I don't, hmm. I have so many threads of thoughts going different directions right now. I'm trying to figure out how do we boil it down to one little
In
thing.
in closing, because the audience will have to listen to the next episode to get the answer. The answer. What's one thing you want our audience to take away from this conversation?
Well, the first thing that popped into my mind is it's okay for you to have conversations with people that make you feel like you're walking on your tippy toes in the deep end of a swimming pool. That's what the conversations with you do for me sometimes. They cause me to feel like, all right, am I tracking? Am I not tracking? And there's something about that that I like. It forces me to reflect in an honest way after we converse, because you replay thoughts in your mind and you think, where were the positives? Where did I contribute? Where did I track? Where was I with what the person I was dialoguing with saying? Where was I with them? And where was I not quite with them? And in which ways did my own pride restrict me from understanding what they were saying? And in which ways did my own eagerness and willingness to learn allow me to understand what they were saying? Those are the takeaways that I get from these dialogues with you.
That's very helpful, and I hope that someone's listening to that, because that's very courageous to say, and very leader like if it, yeah, that's a leader acknowledgement. That's leadership.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because the types of people that are attract quality people to work with them
Mm-hmm.
feel are capable of feeling and thinking through the way that you just articulated yourself. So that I think that's a very empowering sentiment. Um,
It's rooted in something very selfish. I have to also put this out there. The selfishness is I don't like feeling like I don't understand what a person is saying. And the only strategy I've discovered to alleviate the feeling of that is to address it in the open, to literally state it as, this is what I don't like and this is what I try to avoid. And that for me has worked as a good strategy because it kind of alleviates you of this feeling of being a leader. I don't like the feeling of being a leader. I would like it, if a person is going to be that, I would like it to emerge and manifest through their authentic behavior and not necessarily through, I wear this title, I wear this badge, this is what I am. Well, that's a narrative, and every narrative has a weight to it. And some people feel weights differently than others. The weight of that narrative on me personally is not one that I enjoy. I don't like that. And so the way that I alleviate myself of that weight is to deny it. And I deny it through saying things like I just said, which I don't, it's not a deceptive thing. That's literally how I am. It's like, if I don't track, I want to have the honesty to say to you in real time, I don't track. Please help me to follow what you're saying. So I agree with you. Is it a quality of leadership? Yes, but it's an ironic quality because it's not, it was discovered through unpleasant experience, if you will.